Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast with Michael Regan and Kathryn Peterson. And we are really excited today to dig into a topic that I think has gained some serious momentum over the last 25 years. And it's one that maybe since COVID has really become part of the lexicon in the business world that we operate in. So I just want to talk about it a little bit. I want to give us a chance to understand not just what the terms mean, but how they apply to the way in which we operate today. But before I get nerdy on all of us with some of that, I do want to bring in my talented co-host, Kathryn Peterson. Kathryn, great to see you as always.
Thank you so much. I'm always excited to chat about a new topic, and we're definitely going to do that today. It's a word that's gotten a little more popular, so it'll be fun to break it down a little bit more. And I know that it's a topic you like to talk about, so it'll be a good day today.
Yeah, I think my introduction to it was in a conversation with Daniel Harkavy maybe 6, 7 years ago. It was a term that he was using after spending some time with some clients who had perhaps introduced it to him. And the origin, as best I can tell, comes out of the Army War College. They started using a term called VUCA back in the post-Cold War era. So we're talking, in the United States lexicon, maybe around 1990, maybe 91. This term started showing up in that context. And it was used at the time to describe what it was like to operate in a post-Cold War world. Uh, Economically, militarily, and maybe even socially, these were times that were becoming different than they had been for the previous 50 years. And so it required us to analyze, what that world was going to be like. And these four phrases kept coming up in the description, and they just got bunched together into a word we decided to make up called VUCA. So let's take VUCA and unpack it just in terms of, what those words mean. The words simply mean volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Those are the four words that make up that acronym. And when we think about the application of that word in the way it was introduced, I think it's more exciting to me and hopefully to our audience to talk about it in a business context. Because while it still has military application in terms of its usage, I don't know that that's an area that we have any expertise. And quite frankly, I think that that's a lot of difficulty to navigate because I think the geopolitical landscape that we're in an election year has enough landmines of its own. So I'd like to steer clear of those, and I'd like to look at it in a business context. So, Kathryn, I'll ask you first. You said it's something you're hearing more about recently. As
Mhm.
you hear that, what comes to mind when you hear VUCA? Where does your mind go as a production leader in the housing industry?
So initially, my brain always goes to chaos a little bit of not knowing where you're going, not having a path forward, or not knowing where that path may be going, and how to deal with the strategic planning around that when you're not sure of the direction. That's kind of my brain thinking, okay, how do you manage through a little bit of chaos, maybe?
Okay, chaos is a great word. If you had to, and we don't need to get technical with the definition of chaos, but just as you use that word in your mind, is that bringing a positive or a negative inclination?
I think most leaders, and I'll say most because there's some who thrive in that space, but most would say that it's negative because if you can't see forward in a clear way, it's really hard to plan and really hard to set your team up for that.
So in the context of that, when you hear that phrase, if it brings up the thought of chaos and that has a negative bent more often than not,
Mhm.
um, do you think most folks would tend to then make steps forward out of caution or even fear because it has a negative implication? Is that the direction that would go? Or what would you see when you start to watch that thought move forward into action?
Yeah, I think that it I think a lot of leaders would say, well, let's plan for the worst. Let's plan for the worst case. Let's be prepared if things go this direction. They could go that direction, but let's plan for if they go in the negative direction. So absolutely, I think you're going to have some fear because un- uncertainty and fear go hand in hand a lot.
Okay, so let's play with this topic a little bit because I said I wanted to do it in a
Mhm.
business context. What if I told you that the stock market, for about as long as we've ever known it to exist, has experienced volatility,
Mhm.
uncertainty,
Mhm.
complexity, and ambiguity? Would you
Mhm.
say that your experience looking back at the stock market has been one where uh, the business leaders that lean heavily in those markets have experienced really good outcomes or really bad outcomes?
I would say over time, good.
I
Um,
would
and
too.
and there's that trend, and I think that because VUCA may be newer in our industry, and whether that be real estate or mortgage, that people aren't sure of the trends. But I agree that that there's a lot of industries who've experienced this for a long time.
Yeah, so I think that's why I want to spend a little bit of time on it with our audience today is if they're hearing this term and the context that they're hearing it from are leaders who are being cautious or fearful, they're developing contingency plans like you described. The impression that you may have as you follow your leader is, oh crap, things are really bad and we've got to be prepared for the worst. And while there's some truth to that side of the coin, it seems to be absent of the other side of the story, which is, but we also should be preparing to take massive advantage of a market like this and
Mhm.
gain real traction to leverage the opportunities that we've been waiting on and make the most of them. And so I use the stock market as an example of that because I think most fund managers, if we were to interview someone in that space, would tell you that truthfully, a market that has those four terms is one that has movement, which means they have opportunity both positive and negatively. So they have
Mhm.
strategies to protect against the negative, but they also have strategies to really take advantage of the positives. And that's where I'd like to spend some time today for those of us in the housing industry, because I think we don't talk enough about those opportunities. We tend to spend a lot of time, and I'm glad you said what you did because it was an honest answer. Again, audience, once again, we're not scripted. We don't do it on purpose because we believe that you should get honest commentary from Kathryn and I and honest questions that flow from that. And so in this case, if that's where many, and you were clear, not all, but many leaders will go that way. How does your mind shift when you start thinking about, okay, so those are real contingencies we need to acknowledge? How does your mind shift when you think about the opportunities that also exist in a VUCA world? What kind of thoughts does that bring out?
So not everybody can handle adversity or change or shifts. And I think that there are people who are better practiced at that and can handle those ups and downs. And therefore, there's some opportunity with just attrition that happens in any industry that goes through ups and downs. Every down, you lose a certain percentage of the industry, a certain percentage of the people who are employed in that industry. And that does give opportunity to the people who can withstand those ups and downs a little bit easier. And whether that be that companies go away, people go away, managers go away, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, so change creates opportunity, and when you look at that, our industry right now, the housing industry,
Mhm.
is certainly down in terms of folks that are licensed to professionally execute. And so play that forward for me a little bit, Kathryn. Let's
Mhm.
be more specific than you even were there. And we don't need to dig into the numbers as much as we need to dig into the trends and the direction that it's going.
Yeah.
So if you're coaching people today who have fought tooth and nail over the
Mhm.
last 2.5 years to be at a place like where we are today, where the opportunity is there with fewer competitors, what kind of advice are you giving them to get prepared as we look into not just a present VUCA, but a future VUCA? How could they take advantage of that?
Yeah. So I think that some of those is just knowing or reiterating the numbers of, hey, we have seen some people drop out. You're stronger. than that, and you've got this. And if you can be here, there's going to be less originators, which means you're going to have this great opportunity because those clients are still going to need somebody. So stick around, stay in touch with people, be available, reach out to the referral partners you have, the past clients you have, because the last person they used may not be around. And so please dig in wherever you see that opportunity.
Okay, so just in, raw numbers, fewer people operating, it's a supply and demand. It's a
Yep.
macroeconomics 101. And I think that's hard to argue from a data standpoint. And, we'd be happy to have that discussion. Should you like to add some data to the comments in our podcast, that's a great direction to go. But I don't think we could make a good case where fewer people are going to have more opportunities simply because there are less people willing to transact. I think with that, how about the idea that there are a lot of folks in that customer pool who perhaps as the world is shifting and changing in the way it transacts, maybe they're not all on board with the modern mortgage approach. Doesn't mean that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just means
Mhm.
it's a big world out there. And
Mhm.
even though the future might be of a younger generation that expects it to go a certain way, the current generation isn't dead yet. We're not
Mhm.
gone. There are folks that
Mhm.
still need help. So how would you coach someone who's in the middle of this shift where we all see the future that is coming, but we're not there yet, and there are still many things happening in the messy middle? How would you coach someone through those opportunities in a VUCA world?
I think that the clients are feeling the same thing. So the more we can answer those questions up front for them and have calm that we're projecting out to our clients and realtor partners to say, hey, we know it's a little wild right now. Let's back up and go back to the basics. Let's sit down. Let's talk through the worries. Let's readjust. And then to prep, I think figuring out, okay, this could change quickly. If I need to grow quickly, what do I need to do? If I need to contract quickly, what does that look like? If I need to add extra referral partners, what does that look like? So just kind of playing out those different scenarios that could happen and being prepared with you and your team, I think are both good strategies.
All right, I'm going to put a word on the table because this is the
Mhm.
word I thought of as I listened to your description: agility. I think
Mm,
agility is going
yep.
to be an asset in the future. Your ability to assess that shifting need of the client and recognize that one size will not fit all right now, and that you need to have the agility to recognize their need and quickly shift in the direction that they need to go. And of course, it's up
Mhm.
to you to decide. If you choose to operate with fewer transactional variables, that will limit the pool of people you'll get to work with. If you
Mhm.
choose to show agility toward some flexibility in the way in which you transact, it could allow you to have more opportunities. And let's be clear, more isn't always better. I just think it's important to think through these things as we head into that future because we're, economically, as we've talked about on recent podcasts, heading into a season in which we believe there'll be a nice long run of value for those of us in the housing industry. And we want to look back and say, boy, we picked a good strategy for how to
Mhm.
to handle that season. And so agility was the word I kept thinking of as you were describing
Mhm.
how to really face that future. What other words come to mind, Kathryn, as you think about a person who will be doing business in a world that's in that shift? What other words come to mind? What can we do to help prepare our audience?
I think also leadership. Someone said something once of, are you a leader or a helper? And that hit pretty hard. So now it may not be just presenting the information, it may be saying, this is the direction I think that you need to go and why. So people are
Mm.
seeking that advice because you can get lots of options from different the internet, AI, etc. But actually, advice that's solid is what all of that is missing. And so taking a different approach can also, so leadership essentially is what popped in my head when you asked that
I
question.
like that word because I think a model that I've visualized in the past dovetails nicely with it, which is we live in an information age. Information is free. And with AI, it's
Mhm.
so accessible. Like we can get so much information that it's almost reached information overload. We're
Mhm.
almost paralyzed by the amount of information we can get. So our customers aren't seeking you. If you're in real estate, if you're in lending, your customers aren't seeking you for information today. They have plenty of it and it's available to them with just a few quick touches of the button or now just a speak to the machine and it'll talk to you back. That's not what they need. Information that leads to education, helpful, because now you're helping to process that information for them. So they may seek
Mhm.
you to say, "Hey, I've heard all these things. What does this mean?" And they want you to educate them. But your point is really well taken. If we simply leave it as education, like, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this is what all that means, and you have lots of options. Go think about it and get back to me." That could be equally paralyzing to them because now, instead of just a bunch of information that they're overloaded on, the paralysis is, "Oh my gosh, it seems like these lead to options, and I've got to pick the right one. How do I know what the right one is?"
Mhm.
They're not all just black and white math. And so your
Mhm.
point is if you position yourself as an advisor on the real estate side or on the lending side, now's the time to think about being clear that I'm willing to help you choose. I'm willing to help you pick the strategy. No different than a financial advisor who's going to put together a portfolio with your 401k or your other investment choices. No different than anyone that's going to help you pick the insurance plan you need, whether that's life insurance, whether that's disability insurance, whether that's healthcare. We need someone in the mortgage and the real estate space to say, "I'm advising this over this for these reasons based on exactly what you've told me." We need to make clear that we're willing to step into that space because information that leads to education without real direction is still paralyzing in a VUCA world. So we need to get that through our heads that it's not good enough to just educate. We have to advise.
Absolutely. And that's a good word too, advice. So,
Great.
yeah.
Kathryn, what other questions come to mind when you think of this term and we apply it in the context of business?
So, one of the things I think about a lot is how can a leader set up expectations in this VUCA world? Let's call it. Sounds like a book, doesn't it? VUCA
Yeah.
world.
Maybe you need to write that book. I don't know.
There you go. So, how can a leader set up expectations correctly without being too negative? Because I think there's a balance there.
Yeah. So I guess let's practice what we just taught. I'll give some advice on this one. I think first of all, being honest about the negative is important. We have to recognize that for many people, fear is a very real thing. That our emotional response is not fabricated. There's
Mhm.
a physiological experience we have as our brains get hijacked by information that causes us to feel or experience anxiety. And so, as that is a experience that our teammates are feeling or our customers are feeling, we need to acknowledge that without uh, getting caught in that, without being trapped in that. So somehow we have to give a sense of reality and then hope. And so it takes a combination of both. If all we do is speak about reality, well, we're no different than all the negative political stuff we can see on Facebook these days or out on cable
Mhm.
news. Reality left to itself just leaves you feeling more anxious.
Mhm.
Reality with hope leads us to realize, okay, there's opportunity in this, and this person, this leader, is giving me encouragement to lean into that and maybe even take advantage of that in order to grow. So if you are a leader listening to our podcast today and you are a leader that is experiencing VUCA in the world that you're in, recognize that your teammates are too, and that they do have some fear attached to it. Most
Mhm.
of them do. So be honest about that, but make sure you bring a message of hope with it. Where in your world does the opportunity exist, and point them toward it with narratives. Stories will help so much because what it does is it allows that emotional response they're having to drop down a little and drop down a little as they want to engage with your story. Versus if you just pelt data and facts at them, it's very easy to get into a back and forth debate over,
Mhm.
well, where did you get that information? Well, what if the context changed? Well, that doesn't lead to the positive side of the application. What can lead there are stories. And if you really think about this in the simplest of senses, this is going to lead leaders to become much better at developing their skills of empathy, active listening, and storytelling. Things that at Building Champions we've been talking about for a long time. I think the world that we're heading into will need more of that, which first of all, as a coach, tells me I've got some job security. We're going to have more
Mhm.
opportunity to work with leaders who need to develop these skills, and those that are willing to develop them and actually put them in play with their audience. I think they're going to start to separate when they think about recruiting and retention, because suddenly they are going to stand out. That leader looks, sounds, and acts differently than a leader who in a VUCA world simply sees the negative and stays with the information only level and isn't really willing to bring it down.
Mhm.
Um, it's gonna take a shift, and that's why I loved that word agile. An agile leader is gonna be excited about that uncertainty, and they're gonna wanna lean into it, and they're gonna look at that complexity and say, "How do I simplify?" And they're gonna look at that ambiguity, and they'll say, "How do I just say things plainly and clearly?" They'll look for the counterbalance of VUCA as the leverage they need to separate themselves from their competition, and I believe their audience will be drawn to that.
And I think another thing to point out is so the word ambiguity, when are we 100% clear on anything? And I think that one's an important one because I think that and even uncertainty, there's always that. And I think that one is more mindset than any of the others, I think, as far as, hey, stepping into that is always beneficial. If you're stepping into uncertainty, you're stepping into fear, you're stepping into ambiguity. So I think that's just an important thing to round out the
Y-
discussion with.
You just said something that triggered a thought, and I want to throw it out there in case the audience missed it earlier because we didn't say it clearly. You used the word "it's always been there," or the phrase "it's always been there." And look, as a guy who just got back from Rome, I know you took your family there about a
Mhm.
year ago. Let me assure you, VUCA existed in the Roman Empire. And all you have to do is go to the Colosseum if you want to witness, like,
Yeah.
firsthand a culture that embraced VUCA for its good and its bad.
Hmm.
So I think it's helpful to realize, okay, the world has always experienced some level of these things. We're just choosing to define them in a unique way in the post Cold War era. And that has some implications. On the positive side, we have more awareness to it. On the negative, it could mean that thanks to, the internet, social media, cable news, it's in our face a lot more. And so we have
Hmm.
to be really smart about tuning out some of those places that bring the negative side without any of the counterbalance that we need. It's okay to have the negative information if it's a data point, but you're giving me hope and a plan for the future that we can, lean into that. If you're just bringing me negative data, that starts to erode my humanity at some point. And so I think for those of you out there listening, if you find yourself only feeling negative about the VUCA world we live in and only seeing fear as you look into the future, consider your sources. You might need to take, a digital pause from some things or people in your life that are choosing to reinforce that because the world, as Catherine just said, has always had these things. They've shown up in different ways. And I think if we look back over history, we've found a way to develop some pretty amazing progress when we just don't get paralyzed by that fear.
Absolutely. That's a great summary. And again, I'm just going to bring up the word hope and stories and focusing on those two, I think.
Yeah, data is bedrock, but if we only have data and we don't mix in some hope, with some storytelling, I think we miss the opportunity to lead our teams forward. And if you're, just imagine, I know you love a good sports analogy, Kathryn. There's some of your
I'm
favorite things
ready.
about working with me. But imagine if you led your team out on the field and the only thing you told them is this other team is really good and watch out for this and watch out for this and be careful of that. And if there was no game plan to how we're going to take advantage of them, well, all you're doing then is you're operating out of fear. You're playing defense the whole time. And the
Mhm.
minute they crack the code and get past you, you're defeated. You just give up
Mhm.
because there was never any hope to win. All we could pray for was to not lose. Well, that's a terrible game plan. And I hope those of you in business today that find yourself realizing, oh my gosh, we've been operating over the last 2.5 years in total defensive mode. All we've been doing is protecting the business, fight to stay alive, fight to survive. Look, if that's what you did over the last 2.5 years, congratulations. You've managed to survive. It's time to give your team some hope and give them some clear paths in which they can start winning again. So I'm going to finish today's topic by saying VUCA is simply a phrase. It's neutral. It's not negative. It's neutral.
Mhm.
You need to apply it in a way that is honest about the negative, but also honest about the positive. And if you as a leader can develop that skill set, you can accelerate quickly, whether you're recruiting or retaining talent, to separate yourself from your competition, because we need leaders right now that believe that the best is still to come. And if we can lead our teams that way, I honestly think we will experience another nice long run of growth in your business model.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Building Bigger Lives. We talked about VUCA. Great, great conversation. Thank you so much, Michael. And you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Apple Podcasts. So check us out. Any comments? We'd love to hear. Anything else to round out the conversation, Michael?
No, I just appreciate you being open to it. I appreciate our audience that listened. And look, you might know someone today that needs to hear what we were able to talk about or even wants to dig further into the topic. So please share an episode if you found some value in it today.
Great. Thank you, everyone.